Great. Can you all see my screen? Sorry, this started at the end. Can you all see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. I am gonna get started. So yeah, hey everyone, thanks for taking the time on a Friday. Hopefully this topic was interesting enough to compel people to join. Today we're really gonna be talking about developing your pitch. Quick high-level background about myself. My name's LJW. I lead special projects here at Story, and I'm super excited to kind of walk through this topic around developing your pitch. For this presentation, I'm just going to give you some sort of mechanics, and each slide, has some sort of functional things you should think about. But for a lot of these kind of pitches, like to just voice over examples. And then once we get towards the end of the presentation, I want to leave ample time for questions that come in through the chat. So if you have questions, please drop it in the chat, and then Rebecca and or myself will kind of curate some of them, and we'll use the remaining time to talk through it. So that's the plan. Great. So let's just start off very high level. I think when people think pitch, they think pitch deck, they start going and working in slides, and there's a bunch of stuff that people just jump to action. But I really wanted to kind of think through like why a pitch is even important and what it is. And really, I dissect it down to a couple things, right? Like when you're building anything, you're selling an idea. Actually, even if you work in a professional setting, you're selling an idea, right? So when you're selling an idea, ultimately it comes down to you're convincing someone, usually users, investors, customers. In a pitch, it's usually investors, but it's not the only group, that they should care about your thing, whatever your thing is, right? You could be selling, a new technology you're building. You can be selling a physical good, or just an idea. Whatever it is, you're trying to get people to actually give it some attention. And then I think a pitch is a really good framework, structure framework to tell your story. I feel like a lot of people, I feel like this idea of storytelling has been thrown around a lot, but not a lot of people really understand what it means to like have a structured story. And, the best stories are the ones that are actually heard and remembered and shared, which means ultimately the way you tell your story, you have to capture that attention. Otherwise, it's just, words that you're saying, right? And so that's kind of why I think you really need to spend time on it. I think for your purposes as people building stuff, like whether it's a project, and maybe turning it into a company. I think pitching is a really important skill that is very non-obvious, and there's no one right way to do it, but there are some mechanics you can think about. Um, Going a little bit deeper, a pitch can be many things. Okay, so this is not like an exhaustive list, right? A pitch is obviously in some cases a pitch deck, right? Uh, but it's also a telegram blurb. When you write a long message trying to get someone to take a meeting with you and for you to tell them your idea, that's in a way a pitch too. When you write an email to try to convince someone to partner with you or integrate with you, or even if you're writing an email to hire someone, right? Like that is itself a pitch as well too. Um, a pitch oftentimes is more verbal than anything. So when you're at a conference and someone says, "Hey, tell me about the thing you're working on," and maybe you have like 2 minutes before they have to go to their next thing, like that itself is a pitch, right? So pitches come in many flavors. For today, we will walk through the pitch deck because that's the most comprehensive. But as I walk through that, you should think about how the pitch deck is only is meant to be like a bunch of modules, if you will, and you don't have to go through everything. But I want it to be more comprehensive than that. So pitch decks, obviously, maybe many of you have seen it. I have seen probably a couple thousand pitch decks in my career, just given the various roles I have. And the number one takeaway I have is most of them are pretty terrible. And part of the reason is they say a lot, but they don't actually say much, right? And so one of the things we've done with our ecosystem teams and kind of just like working with other folks and kind of sharing experiences, like, we've sort of compiled what we think is a really good framework for this. I will use the rest of this presentation to go through this, so don't like take notes or study this, right? This is meant to say all you should really take away from this slide is there's a structure to it. You don't have to follow it very rigidly. In fact, you shouldn't, right? A lot of pitching is, half of it is kind of like mechanics, right? Like following what's on the screen, but half of it is art as well too, right? Like how you pitch it, how you tell the story. You can move it around, but generally most pitches I've seen that are good, which I would argue is like probably 1% of pitches that I've seen, will have some element of this flavor. And if you also look at how some of the biggest companies have been started, like Airbnb, for example, or like Uber, a lot of their pitch decks kind of follow this storyline. Okay, so I'll kind of go through and explain things in detail. Um, Team introduction in the early stage when you are basically someone who has probably a dream and a couple lines of code and maybe a mock-up, the team ends up being probably one of the most important criteria for investors because what you want to build, whether it will work, whether you'll get users that there are going to be so many things that happen when you actually go to market. The thing that won't change is your background. And so a lot of times when I see people talk about themselves, they really kind of gloss over it, right? They'll say like, "Hi, I'm X. I went to this school and I did this job," right? And that's a way to do it. I would say it's a pretty average way to do it. I think when you're pitching yourself and your team, what you really want to answer is the second bullet point. Like, why are you the best team to build this company or product, right? So I'll use a random example, right? If you say you want to go build something in AI and your background is in AI, like you should probably talk a little bit more about that, right? It's less relevant if your background is from some certain school, but it's more relevant that you have like AI work experience, right? So ultimately, you're telling the story of like, this is who I am, this is the team I've assembled, these are the people I'm working with, not to literally tell them information about yourself, but you're telling it in the broader context of like, then I'm going to tell you the thing I'm building, but I want you to know I'm the best person to build it. Okay. From there, you then want to highlight, the problem you're solving. And I actually think this is probably, if I had to pick one section of any pitch, this is the most important one. People think investors fall in love with solutions, but in fact, they actually fall in love with problems, right? Because solutions, everyone has a solution to everything, but defining the problem actually is the hardest part. And most of the pitches I've actually been on the receiving end of, people actually spend so much time talking about their solution, but they don't actually illustrate whether the problem is even worth solving. Right. So I'll give you like a really crude example, right? Like let's say you're, at a conference and you notice people are really thirsty and you're like, oh, I want to sell water bottles, right? Like that's the problem, right? People are thirsty, but it's a conference and there's only like 200 people. Like that's a really small market, right? Like an investor would probably never want to invest in something like that. Right. Versus if you're like, oh, I see there's a problem, in this space that is growing really quickly and it's a problem because everyone complains about it, so on and so forth. Like all of a sudden it feels like a thing you can build a company around. And so when you tell your story and you illustrate your problem, make sure you talk about like what's broken, why it matters, and really explain like two things you really want to nail down in this section is it's a really big problem, right? And you should put numbers to it, right? It's $100 billion problem, it's a $50 billion problem, something big enough because investors don't invest in companies going after small problems. And then second thing is the problem needs to be solved now, right? And so that goes into kind of a little bit tee up into like your solution, so on and so forth. Opportunity is related, right? So so basically when you get here, you're like, hey, I've told you who I am, right? I've told you a problem I really care about. I've told you the problem is really big and super important and critical and needs to be solved. Then you get into this idea of like, okay, the opportunity is actually massive, right? Because ultimately, again, if you're going after a problem, but there's not a big opportunity, right? The investor isn't interested in it, right? And the art here is you need to strike the balance between like the opportunity space you're going after isn't so broad that it's like it shows like you didn't really think about it, but you don't want it to be so specific that it feels like a niche market, like too niche of a market. So bad answer, series of bad answers I always hear is like if I ask like, hey, what is your opportunity you're going after? And they're like, oh, our market is AI. But like like every company is an AI company these days, right? Everybody's using AI in some way, or they'll say something like, "We're in the gaming space, so our market is all of gaming, which is like a $300 billion or $150 billion market," and that's fine, but it's rare that you will be building a solution for all of gaming. And so when you say things like that, it just shows that you're being too high level, right? And you don't actually know what your market is, which is a huge red flag. So once you've defined the problem, then you've defined there's an opportunity related to the problem, then your solution almost is like a no-brainer, right? I told you people are thirsty and I am selling water, right? Like that's such an easy like, if then that kind of statement. And so when you get to solution and product overview, ultimately what you want to do is just show, and again in the early stage you're not going to have a product built by definition. You just want to show like if you build this thing, how does a user get value? And actually, I think this is where a lot of people don't spend enough time. You can just say we're building a platform, right? Because that is not detailed enough, right? Like you want to show the person on the other side that you really thought through, like a user will do this and they're doing this because they have this problem. And if you solve that problem, they unlock this value. And because they have this value, right? And it's a recurring problem, they'll keep coming back to our platform. And, we think there's, 100 million of these users who can access, and therefore we're a big business, right? Like you want to almost show it that way. And again, a lot of people focus on making the product look like really good at this stage. Investors know you're going to iterate like 50,000 times, and especially at a hackathon, right? Like you're going to have a very like MVP type product, right? So I wouldn't over index on like over index on telling why this thing needs to exist and its future vision. Um, Particularly in blockchain, AI, and any of the like newer technology spaces, I think where people often screw up with the product is they also don't explain why they're using blockchain or AI, right? So I get a lot of pitches where people are like, hey, we're building on story, right? Which is great, right? We love that. And then I say, great, why are you building on story? And they don't have an answer for IP or programmable IP, or if they're building on like, a gaming chain, they don't have an answer for like that. Then it just shows that like that technology isn't needed. And if you're pitching yourself as a blockchain project, the story kind of falls short, you know? And then all of a sudden it feels like it doesn't make any sense, right? And so really spend time if you're deploying emerging technologies, how it actually impacts your solution and product. And, throughout all of this, think about how it's different than what like someone else might do, right? So then you go from, that first section, right? We went through problem, opportunity, solution. Now you've basically told someone on the other side of the table, here's a big problem, here's a big opportunity, here's the solution I want to build, right? Um, and in a way, in a pitch, you're asking for money, right? So like implicitly, you're saying I'm asking for money to really kind of build this thing out. I think I'm the best person to build it, but before you even give me money, I've actually built a demo, right? And this is actually really important because the cost to actually building a demo today is very low, right? Like it's very easy to go on an AI tool and vibe code something. It's very easy to put up a mock-up. Ultimately, you want to showcase the thing you just told the person about, right? I told you I wanted to build X. I obviously don't have the money to build a real thing, but I built you a demo that looks like this. And what happens is then you're translating all this like thinking and opportunity and logic into something almost more tangible. And I feel like a product demo is a very easy way to impress someone on the other side. And it doesn't take a lot of time to build, but I think a lot of people skip the step. So it is an opportunity to really kind of differentiate a little. So then after you show them all of this, the investor's sort of next thinking question naturally is like, great, like, do you have competitors? Right. And this is an area too where a lot of builders particularly are weak at because they're so focused on building is they forget to think about who else is out there and who else is working in this market, right? And so ultimately, you want to say, yes, we do have competitors and highlight how you're different. This is actually a super, super, super important section that many builders miss. And the thing I always say is if you believe you don't have competitors, you're in the wrong market because all good market opportunities are competitive. Right, meaning you're not the only one who sees it. What you need to prove is you think you're the only one who can capture the value better than the next person. So if you skip competitors, it almost looks like there's something wrong with the market and not that you have found something no one else found because there's no such thing. And then once you kind of illustrated competitors, you've made this statement like, look, there are competitors. We think we're better, right? And then you want to then start getting into some of the tangible stuff you've done. Okay. So traction is this really interesting thing, right? If you're a large company, it's very easy to show numbers, right? We have 100 million users, our revenue's X, we're growing at what percent? In the early stages, traction is a harder term to define because you have no metrics. Chances are you haven't even launched. But what investors are really thinking about is how do you do more? How have you done more with less, right? So, obviously in a hackathon, but if you're just starting out, maybe you're just one person, two people, three people, right? But if you can show the investor, like, despite the fact that we're a team of three, I actually have two people interested to work with us if we build this thing, right? Or, despite the fact that we don't have a product yet, I have started talking about this on Twitter and we have 50K followers, or something, right? Like you're just trying to show that like I don't have the real traction, but I've done something to prove that my thing isn't just conceptual, right? Like at each stage of this, an investor's ultimately trying to understand, like, is this real? Like, is this something here? Or is this all just something you've like kind of made up and there's no legs to it, right? And so you want to prove any traction you can, right? Sometimes it's number of Discord numbers, sometimes it's winning a hackathon, like anything in the early stage that shows, like, despite the fact that I'm literally one person, two-person team, three-person team, I have done more than what you would expect. So that's really the traction angle, and that shows just momentum, right? Because ultimately, remember, they're investing in the problem that you're going after and the team, right, which is you. And so if you can prove that like you're the team that gets stuff done, even if you don't have money and resources, that is very impressive. Because then an investor will then say, "Wow, if I give the money, they could probably really accelerate." Business model, at this stage, you're really not going to know how you will make money, but you should have an idea of how you would make money. And I think actually, this one takes a little bit, but what the investor ultimately wants to understand from a slide like this is, have you thought through how your concept makes money or how your industry makes money? And like, are you bringing something different? Are you going to do it better? And again, this is just more like thoughtfulness, right? By not doing it, it feels like you're just building something for the sake of doing it. But by doing it, you're kind of showing the investor that you're being very thoughtful, right? Like at some point you want to monetize, and it's important to think that way. Yeah. Roadmap, again, similar to business model, right? If business model is like really far in the future, here's how I think I'll make money. Roadmap is kind of like, what will you do in the next few months or quarters, right? And you basically, once you get to this point, you're really setting up the ask, right? The ask is money in this case. You're setting up the ask in a way that says, okay, I've given you my pitch, my concept, stuff I've done. Here's what I want to do. Here's my plan for the next X weeks, X months. And implicitly, you're kind of priming investor to basically think, if you give me money, this is how I will accelerate this plan. And once you've done all of this, and I see this slide missing almost like 95% of the time, don't forget to actually ask for the thing you're asking for. So oftentimes it's money, right? It's like fundraising. Hey, I'm raising $1 million. I'm raising a seed round. I'm raising an angel round, or like I'm looking for intros. There's no point in you talking to an investor for 20 to 30 minutes if you're not making an ask. Otherwise, you're just kind of wasting your time, which is very valuable, right? And remember, like, all pitches are about convincing people to do something. So in the investor pitch, you have to convince them to invest in you. You have to clearly state, I am raising X million dollars, or I'm raising X, or I'm looking for, Y partners. Whatever the ask is, you have to do it. If you are asking for money, like a lot of entrepreneurs and builders are very afraid of saying a number. Do not use ranges, right? Because throughout this process, you want to show a lot of confidence. If you're like, oh, I'm raising $1 to $5 million, it means you don't actually know what you're raising, which doesn't give the investor confidence that you know how much money you need, right? And so how much money you need is ultimately a decision you have to make, but you have to think about it, right? But using a range is often not the answer, because what happens is then investors get less confidence in like you actually knowing what you want, and you're just throwing out a number, right? So that's like the pitch deck part of this. Um, don't copy this, slide for slide. And if you fill out the template is meant to give you a little bit of a guideline to actually explore all these things about your project if you want to like actually build a company that you should care about. Because because if you don't think about these things, it doesn't really matter. Like, we don't live in a world where if you build cool technology, people are just going to buy it, right? There's a saying, especially in Silicon Valley, but in startup land, that talks a lot about like product is great, but distribution ultimately is what it's about, right? And so if you're not thinking through like how you're getting the product in the hands of users, if you haven't talked to users, like all of this stuff doesn't matter, right? And so when we kind of share a framework like this, really the takeaway is walk through the framework and think deeply about each part of it. Because if you're thinking about each part of this, you effectively have thought about your business holistically, especially if you want to go out and fundraise. And so, in a way, it's also a helpful exercise. Even if you're not immediately fundraising, you should be thinking about these things if you want to build something. So I'll use the rest of the presentation to talk about just some sort of like other takeaways and tips and kind of go through things beyond a pitch deck. So I started off earlier on saying everything is a pitch, right? In a way, me talking to you right now is a pitch, right? I'm trying to get you to understand the importance of pitching, right? So everything is a pitch, and you're always trying to convince people. So what does that mean, right? So here's another example, right? Most of the people in the blockchain space, right? Like you obviously talk to people on Telegram. Sometimes your first interaction with a person to pitch your idea may not actually be a pitch deck. A pitch deck is, 30, is a pretty long document. It could be 30-minute to 45-minute conversation. An investor may not be convinced they want to meet with you, right? And so your first step might be writing a Telegram blurb or a Discord message, whatever you want to call it, and you still want to follow the same framework. Except in the Telegram blurb, you want to realize that like you can't write as much as you would on a pitch deck, right? And so you want to write, like, spend time on these messages being very clear in like, here's my company, I would love to meet for 30 minutes, right? So the ask in this case is not money so much as I want to meet for 30 minutes to tell you about my project. And then at that point, you're pitching for investment, right? Um, and again, these are general notes, not for just the Telegram blurb, but for all of this. It's like all of this is a template. There are actually no hard and fast rules. And I think one of the challenges with pitching anything is people think if I just follow A, B, and C recipe, I will get it done. And it doesn't work that way, right? It's a very iterative process. It's a very like sales process. And any entrepreneur who's built a big business and got successful funding will tell you it takes a really long time to get this right. And so the only thing you can really do is actually practice and iterate on this. I think founders should be very good at remixing and like don't be afraid to like change things that they think is correct. But I often see it like almost be too mechanical, right? Like you can almost see a pitch deck and then say like, oh yeah, they just follow the framework without really thinking about the individual pieces. The last part I'll mention is I think people underestimate like everyone has short attention spans. So you have to write, assume people won't actually read your thing, they'll probably skim it, right? And you should think about that from your pitch deck. You should think about it from your Telegram blurb, from your message, from your text, whatever it is. Like people don't assume people will read the thing you send them. It's nothing against you. It's just everyone's overloaded with information. So you gotta also optimize the writing so that people actually get interested, right? Emails, also a pitch, right? You might be writing to a customer or a partner, hey, I would love to partner. They're not just going to partner with you because you said I want to partner, right? They are, or I want to meet, right? Like people don't just meet because you say you want to meet. I get like a lot of people get messages. I get a lot of these messages that's like, oh, I would love to spend 30 minutes to like kind of chat, and it's like chat about what? You know what I'm saying? So like you have to be very prescriptive, and when you're writing an email, it's also a form of pitching. I used this example earlier on. When you meet someone at a conference, conferences are a great way to meet investors and people who might want to join your project, so on. But you still have to convince them. No one knows you, right? By definition, when you're building a small project, no one knows you. And so you have maybe 30 seconds to convince them that the thing you're working on is interesting. Now, you don't have to do everything in this 30 seconds, but you do need to convince them that your thing is interesting, and they should want to continue talking to you. And then I think this is one of the last sections. I'll just walk through some common mistakes in pitching, and then we can probably open up for Q&A. Overloading the pitch. Again, this just goes back. I want to keep pushing this limited attention span point. A lot of people will write so much on a pitch that people won't even read it, and then it defeats the purpose of the pitch. Right? You want to be able to dissect it down to like the amount of words on this slide, right? Like I could have also taken out like the sentence that just said overloading the pitch, right? Like you want to strike the balance where someone could look at the slide and be like, I get what's going on, but you should tell me more about it. If there was a paragraph of text, you would not digest this and you would not be listening to me right now, right? And so think about, again, your pitch is kind of like a product and the consumer is like the person you're pitching to. you want to make sure they're like digesting your information, and that requires clarity, concision, and all of these things that um, don't feel important, but when you start missing little pieces, they kind of add up. Lack of clarity. So I get this a lot when I ask people like, how do you generate value for your customer? And they like have these long stories with like all these multiple parts. Like you want to dissect it down to uh, one or two sentences, right? And so clarity really takes a long time, right? Because I think it's a lot easier to speak more than less. But you want to be able to be like, in a very simple way, here's what we do, and here's why it's useful. Poor structure, that's another one. Like some people love starting with, the solution, but like people don't care about the solution because they don't know what problem you're solving, right? So that's a common one I see as well. This one is a big one, and there's really like I always look at founders and think like you either do this or you don't, right? And if you think the pitch is important enough, like you would probably practice, right? And so my framework is like if you are thinking about pitching your thing, and if someone literally asked you to pitch in the next 5 minutes and you weren't ready, you haven't practiced enough. That's kind of the bar. I'm not saying you have to hit that bar. I'm just saying that's my general thing for like what separates like the top 1% of founders from the rest. And this just comes down to practice and refining, just like anything, right? Like you just need to spend some time on it. And then this one I would say is like a huge, huge red flag. Like oftentimes investors ask very specific questions. You have to make sure you are answering the question asked. And because you're in this position of building a company, building a project, and you might be asking for money, I think you're expected to have an answer to every question. Now, the answer might not be good, but saying I don't know is okay if you want to follow up with them. But you should be thinking about like part of the skills being able to talk on the fly, like in the moment, and know enough about your business to actually answer a question. Um, you get better over time from pitching. So again, practice is important because then you start understanding what questions you will probably get. And so then most questions you get asked, you probably have an answer to. But when you don't answer a question asked, it makes it look like you're ignoring the question or you don't know and you don't want to admit you don't know. Right. And so that's a really, really important part. And then lastly, I'll just close out with other tips. Fundraising, pitching, whatever. It's all process, right? It's a business development process. The point of saying this is you need to get very organized, right? A lot of people are a lot of times when I see founders raise, I might say like, "Oh, who have you spoken to?" And they can't name the top 3 to 5 people they've spoken to because they didn't write it down somewhere, right? Like it's very simple things that will help you along in your process. Um, Also, make it easy for others to help you, right? Sometimes people will say, "Hey, I want to talk to this person," and on the receiving end of that message, it becomes like, "Okay, great, but like, do you want me to make an intro? If you want me to make an intro, can you send me a blurb?" Like, make it easy for others to help you, so much so that like all the other person has to do is hit forward, right? And so, oftentimes people don't take that into consideration as well. And then be hyper responsive. Obviously, don't come off desperate, but sometimes if you're fundraising is a pretty intense process. It's a sprint. If you take longer than like 24 hours to respond, right? Just think about like the investors also hearing from a lot of other people, and so hyper responsiveness, I think itself is also a skill. And for what it's worth, just to kind of, I think it's really important to set the expectations for anyone. Like people only see the success, right? They only see the article in the news that says XYZ company raised a seed round of Y from these investors, right? They don't actually really appreciate, or the headlines don't capture that uh, in the process of fundraising, you will probably be told no like at least 100 times. And this is what I was saying. Every round of funding I've ever seen come together, right? There was a heavy amount of no's, right? Even the really successful people, it takes a couple no's for them to get it right. Now you can minimize this number by practicing and doing all of that, but you're not going to get it right the first time. The key is just to keep iterating because again, it's a very iterative process. And yeah, that's the talk. I am happy to take some Q&A right now. And Rebecca, I don't know if it's easier. Maybe I could just skim the questions and then kind of go down the list maybe.
Yeah, if you want to. There was one question that I wanted to highlight before all the others, just because
Okay.
in relation to making sure that the person who asked it wanna be understands the rest of them, because they said they don't really understand the opportunity part. Like, what is the opportunity kind of section of the deck that you were talking about? They said, is it like what you can get out of the problem solution, or is it more about the market that you're working in? Can you give a more concrete example of what opportunity is?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the opportunity is really more of the market, right? Because if you think about it this way, if you're building a company, you're obviously trying to capture, trying to attack a problem in a specific market, right? And so the opportunity should represent the size of that market. So you could think of opportunity. This probably should say market opportunity or market size, and that's ultimately the key. Because if you don't highlight that, what happens is then investors don't, at least venture investors don't invest in small markets, right? There might be other investors that do, but that's the importance of this.
That seems
Right.
to have answered one of these questions. The rest of the questions that I've been seeing don't have to be done in a particular order as far as I'm
Yeah, I
sort
would
of
just kind of
thinking. So
skim
if you want
them.
to, yeah, if you want
Yeah,
to skin them yourself to kind of get an
great,
idea of what people have been asking, while you're doing that, I'll thank you, and I'll thank everyone for their questions during the talk. I hope you found this talk really useful so far, and hopefully this Q&A section is also going to be really insightful for you guys, and I hope you are taking notes. I
great,
believe I'm just checking if there are any questions logistically for me, but otherwise,
great, awesome. So I will then just go down the list, and we can do this. We have a little bit of time, so yeah, great. So one of the questions I saw was, can you talk about what percentage of time should be spent on different sections? Does this differ depending on pitch length? I imagine for a 5-minute pitch, you can't just talk about the team. Yeah, so the broader question here is around pacing. There is no right answer for this. Obviously, for a 5-minute pitch, you shouldn't only talk about the team. But if the investor only cares about the team, then you should talk about the team, right? So it really kind of depends. I think ultimately, you should think about, and this is why it's important to like understand, like, is this a 30-second pitch? You probably need a 30-second pitch, a 5-minute pitch, and a 30-minute pitch, right? And I would say of the best signal you can get in a conversation is people asking questions, right? So let's say you have a plan, and I'll just go back to the earlier slide for a second. Let's say you have a plan to spend most of your time on the problem, right? If the investors are like, yeah, don't worry, I work in this space, I totally get the problem. Your job is not to then continue talking about the problem, right? Your job is to listen to the investor and be like, oh, great, they understand the problem. Then you want to like make it a dialogue. They may be like, but I really want to understand your competitors. And so then you might then want to spend more time on that, right? So again, no hard and fast rules. This is a standard thing. And you'll know, like, part of pitching, think of it like, I always joke with people, like, think of it like playing a sports game, right? You don't know what will happen in the sports game, right? But you need to adjust as things kind of happen. And so if people are really interested in competitors, talk about competitors. If people are really interested in your team, talk about the team. But in the beginning, you're just kind of going through your flow until someone jumps in. And I think if you're getting good questions and hard questions from the investor, you've actually captured their attention because they care enough to actually ask these questions. Great. Next question is, what if it's a small market but we generate solid revenue, almost guaranteed return? That's fine. Ultimately, investors, when I say it's a business development process, fundraising, there will be investors who invest in small markets. There will be investors who want to invest in more cash flow projects. There will be investors who want to invest in technology projects. What your job is when you're pitching an investor and they think like, oh, if you are convinced you want to go after this market and you're sure it could generate solid revenue, and the investor's not excited by the market, the best thing you can do is try to end that call as soon as possible, right? Because ultimately, it's not the right fit. And so your job as a founder is not to get 100% win rate with everybody you pitch with. You're actually trying to find the right people to be on this journey with you, which is a very different thing. Great. So I'm just going through the question. If a pitch is more than just a presentation deck, how do you fit these section in just short Telegram message? What do you prioritize? So this might have been asked before the Telegram message, but let me just
yeah, I think it
go.
was.
Yeah, but it's a good point. Ultimately, you want to match the pitch to your medium. right? So I think about it again. You need a 30-second pitch, you need a 5 minute pitch, you need a 30-minute pitch. It's the same thing. You need a long pitch, which is your pitch deck. You need an email pitch, which is shorter. You need a Telegram blurb, which is, shorter. You might need a tweet, like a 280 character tweet, right? That pitches your product on the internet. Like all of these are actually important. And so when you prioritize, again, it's situational, right? Like this is the Telegram blurb. You want to say what you do, your traction. You want to prioritize what makes you like taking a step back, right? Why do you want to write a Telegram blurb? Because you want someone to be like, this is interesting, let's talk, right? And so then when you're doing that way, you then want to write the thing like in all of this stuff. This is a standard framework, but again, as I mentioned, you should remix it. You should strike out sections, add sections. You should think about it as like, what is the thing I should highlight the most that gets me the greatest chance of meeting someone. So I'll give you an example. If you're building an AI startup and you worked at OpenAI, you should probably lead with that, right? Because that might be enough to get you a meeting. If you have, if you're building a gaming company and you worked in a gaming company and you scaled that gaming company to some crazy amount of revenue, you should probably highlight that. If you're fundraising a second round of funding and your first round of investors are really good, you might want to highlight that, right? Like there's no right answer, but you want to prioritize what makes you come off the strongest because your goal is not to do this exercise for the sake of it. Your goal is to write such that they're like, oh, I really want to meet with this person, right? So it's a great question. Um, we talked through the opportunity part. Let's see. Uh, Great. When there's no MVP yet, what's the best way to build trust in a pitch, especially for early stage products? When you have no MVP, remember, MVP is not, it stands for minimum viable product, but think of the minimum viable part. Okay. If you have no MVP, how hard is it to draw a sketch? If you don't have a sketch, right? How hard is it to get some like user interviews, right? Like you want to show something that this isn't just an idea. And to be honest, like if you've used any of the AI tools, drawing a sketch now, you don't even need to be a designer, right? Like you just need to know what it is. And if you haven't thought through enough to draw a sketch of how your product might work, right? And in some level of detail, doesn't have to be super detailed, then you probably haven't actually thought through your product, which is a bigger problem, right? And so building trust is ultimately about doing more than what is expected of you, right? So if you're like, hey, this weekend I was at a hackathon, like obviously a hackathon might be 2 to 3 days, but if you show them a really well robust diagram and you said, hey, I called a couple of my friends who might be users of this product and here's what they have to say, I mean, that's way more than what people expect in a weekend, right? And so ultimately that's kind of your calibration. Yeah. um can you give us some advice for hackathon pitches? If we could win hackathons to show traction, maybe we should master that first. Yeah. So a hackathon will be way reduced, right? Like you'll have some constraint. Maybe you only pitch for a minute. That's fine, right? One good resource for hackathon pitches is to go on, and this is where like there's a lot of resources out there. So don't take this as the only resource you get. Um, at Y Combinator, one of the top accelerators in the world, right? Um, uh, uh, they used to, they might still do, they only allot 2 minutes for pitching, right? And so like Airbnb, which obviously is a major company today, like pitched their thing in 2 minutes. So did Dropbox, so did, all these other kind of winners from Y Combinator. And so um like there's no advice I can give you. I think one of the best things you can do is actually just go on YouTube, go on the internet, look up Y Combinator best pitches and just see how people do it. And then try to like practice that, right? This is like again, this document I presented is a blueprint, but like applying this is what ultimately gets you to the thing. So it's a good thing with hackathon pitches. But I think a good thing is just maybe look up examples and go there. Great. Next one. What's the best way to size the problem and get a good figure such that for the TAM in the market? Yeah, this at this early stage, sizing the problem is less mathematical and sophisticated. You just want to know, like to be honest, the real answer is probably Google searching, right? A little bit because at this stage you don't actually know the exact market, but you want to know which universe you're in, right? And so you want to be as specific as possible, but you don't need to. like actually do actual math for it. I mean, you can, but it feels like a waste of time, right? If I'm being honest at this stage. Now, when you're like a bigger company, you probably should do the math for it. But for example, if you're like, hey, uh, I'm building a gaming product and it's going to be a AAA game, right? And it's going to be a role playing game. Like those three statements, you could probably Google and say, like, okay, cool. How big is gaming? It's probably, I don't know, I think it was like $150 billion and change. Okay, great. But the role playing, the AAA market is only X. Like all these numbers are on the internet. You just want to prove that this is the universe I'm going into and it's a really big market, right? But it doesn't have to be hyper sophisticated. If anything, you should just do some research and try to kind of understand that. Yeah. Um, Great. How do we respond when a potential investor says your valuation is too high and at your stage the company's not worth that? So that's a decision you have to make, right? It's a great question. Valuation will come up all the time. Valuation is ultimately set by the market of like willing buyer and willing seller, if you will. So if you're like, hey, I think my company's worth 10 million and every investor tells you it's too high, you have two decisions. You either lower your valuation or don't raise money. And you might be in a position to not have to raise money. If one investor tells you your valuation is too high, well, what do the other investors tell you? Right? Or one investor tells you the valuation is too high, but it's your dream investor, like then you have to decide, is it worth it to lower your valuation? Right? And so ultimately, I'm saying these things is because again, I do these presentations, I heavily caveat, like, I don't have the answers. These are just the different scenarios. Ultimately, when you're building a company, you are going to be making like a million decisions. Valuation is one of them. You have to understand why you think you're worth X. And if you really think you're worth that, but the market is telling you it's not, then you're probably not worth that, or you need more time to prove it, you know? Um, so it's a great question, but it's one that, again, more art than science and what you're willing to accept and what the market's willing to accept given what you're pitching. Great. So would a 30-minute pitch be 30 minutes of talking straight or 15 minutes content and then expect questions? So the way I would always do it is if you look at this structure, it's a really good question. If you look at this structure that's on the screen right now, I might try to do 20 minutes and leave 10 minutes for Q&A, right? Because ultimately, look, the pitch you're probably going to send in advance, right? And hopefully they would have skimmed it. Usually most people will at least flip through the deck and they'll get a sense of it. The signal you really want to understand is in that first meeting, how engaged are they? If you talk for 30 minutes, chances are they're not engaged, right? If you talk for 20 minutes and they're like asking you questions and you go over time, then they are very engaged. If you don't even get to pitch because they say, I have two questions I really want to answer, then you know they're hyper, hyper, hyper engaged because they're willing to stop your pitch because they probably read it to then say, I have two specific questions. Yeah. Next question. How do we know the investor is a good fit? So this is actually a pretty philosophical question. Um, Depends on what you're looking for, right? You should decide as the founder what you think the role of an investor is, right? Some people just want investors to give them money and let them do their job and not ever whatever. Some people want investors for their expertise in a certain market because they want to access customers. Some investors want operational support. I think one good framework to think about it is as a founder, where are you weak, right? And this is going down to this thing. Anybody building anything will have weaknesses. The best founders usually are good at like one, two, or three things, right? But then they generally are pretty average on the other. But where they're really good is they learn how to like round themselves out to do that, right? So I'll make it up. If you worked in marketing, you probably should be good at marketing. Otherwise, you haven't really accomplished much, which then goes back to the idea that like your team, you're probably not a good team, right? So if you worked in marketing, you might not have as much business development ability or technical ability or something like that. And so then you might hire around that, right? And so ultimately an investor, aside from giving you money, the best investors are also partners in your company building journey. And you should think about the best investors should be able to round out your kind of weaknesses, right? And so that's how you should think about it. Now, you might have a different preference. You might say like, I just want money from the investors. That's fine too, right? There's no hard and fast rule. So, um, great. I think we were able to lightning round all those questions. So, if there are no other questions, I'm happy to give some time back on Friday.
Thank you very much, LJW, and thank you everyone for your questions. I hope those answers were really helpful for you. If we have any last minute questions, now is the time to ask. Otherwise, we will let you go and enjoy the rest of your Fridays. I really, really appreciate your commitment to attending workshops, especially because I'm seeing lots of familiar names who've definitely been in every session we've had this week, which is absolutely amazing. And I can't wait to see what you end up building out in the Buildathon. And I hope that from all of the things you've been learning through all these really varied sessions, you're going to have a really, really awesome product, pitch, and solution by the end of the Buildathon. So thank you once again, LJW. If anyone wants to get in contact, would that be possible? Or if they have questions, could they put them on the Story Builders Discord?
Yeah, I think the Discord is just the best way just to manage the volume. In general, our philosophy is more if you ask a question, we want it to be helpful to everyone in the community. So we prefer the Discord and folks are pretty active in there. So I would say
Yeah.
that's the best way to kind of learn more. And then I would again echo there is so much good stuff on the internet. There's so much bad stuff on the internet, but there's so much good stuff on the internet. Sometimes even just like watching how other people have done it and stuff like that, like everyone learns differently. Half this battle is understanding like how you learn best. And so, yes, definitely ask questions in the Discord, but definitely also look up other examples and kind of learn that way as well. So I do really push that and echo that. Great. Thank you, Rebecca.
Amazing.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for your amazing advice. Have a great weekend, everyone, and I will see you all on Monday for the start of our partner workshops. So if you're looking to hack on some of the partner bounties, this is the place to be to make sure you're understanding all the tech and how to get started. So I'm really looking forward to those next week. But in the meantime, enjoy your weekends, and I will see you all soon.
Great. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.